What's up, everybody? It's another episode of Iron and News. I'm here with a different co-host, Indy Left. You know him, you love him,
Hey,
and below us, the great and powerful Gordon Dimmack. How are you, Gordon?
I'm really well. How are you, mate?
I'm doing fine. Um, Recently, you attended the NATO event over in the UK. Galloway was there. I saw Richie was there. Um, I haven't seen much coverage of it over here, and I definitely wanted to ask you your experiences there. If you could tell the people.
For some background on it as well, because this is a
receiving
conference
end
that
of
Sorry, go ahead.
this is a con this is sort of a conference that was meant to be held at a much larger venue that than it was actually eventually held. Um, it was originally going to be held at a church near Euston Station, which I've covered many events at. But when word got out where the event was booked, the event itself came under huge pressure via email, phone calls, etc., and had to pull out of the event, wouldn't hold the event. So the conference, which was severely, obviously, highly critical of NATO, there was some great speakers that you mentioned there, had to rebook at Conway Hall, and then the same thing happened at Conway Hall. Conway Hall came under the same pressure and cancelled the event. And even, I think it even got to the point where the event organizer, I've actually got coverage of it somewhere, where he says that Conway Hall actually threatened to take him to court over what was happening. But anyway,
Hmm.
eventually they held the event at it was a residence, a really much smaller residence as well, that's owned by the Venezuelan government
Gotcha.
in the UK.
Like their
And
embassy, or
I don't think it was their embassy, but I think it was somehow like an attaché to something, some diplomatic. Governments have
gotcha.
got all sorts of buildings, obviously in London. You know what it's like. But I think it was attached to the Venezuelan government. I don't know how. Somebody from the event will be able to give you more details on that.
Hmm.
But it was a much smaller event, so they had to help. I mean, when I got there, the queue was around the corner, and they managed to get through the day. I was there for the first part. I think they had 3 sessions. I was there for the first session. The George Galloway was there, obviously, and Chris Williamson, who's my mate, and there were some other great speakers as well. Dan Kovalik. There was a lady from Liverpool, and I must apologise for forgetting her name now. But she recently she went viral because she was giving Keir Starmer both barrels. This is a real powerful lady. She had made an excellent speech. And I think Nick Brana came over from America as well. He
Hmm.
gave a great speech, because obviously you had the anti-war protest, I think, the week before in Washington. Um, it was a great day, but it was what was striking for me most throughout. Not just how well it was received, and the largest applause throughout while I was there was for Julian Assange when his name was mentioned,
Right.
for Julian Assange. But also, what's striking for me, just seeing the way the NATO sort of machine tried to stop the events even
hmm
taking place. You can't even have people speaking truth with regards to the history of NATO and its hegemon. You can't even have people saying that truth. And you just see how power sort of came down on these events, and they had to pull their support for the event. I mean, it must have been horrible for them, the owners of these events as well.
Yeah.
But it was just like this was just a hall that was going to have somebody speak, can you imagine what it's like when NATO come calling on a country, and
Yeah.
how much power sort of manipulates a country in that way, if that's the way they do it to just two venues that we're going to hold a few people who are cast to the outsides of society by the mainstream for telling the truth. And that's pretty much what I took away from the event, apart from the fact that every speaker was fantastic. And I'm really glad that it finally it finally got the go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, and they were using the weight of the media as well to smear the event, to cause a mass pressure campaign, to try to minimize it, to try to diminish it, to try to push it into a smaller venue. It's gross. I mean, it's more narrative management. It's more trying to control the messaging and trying to quiet the people that are speaking loudest against what's happening, against what we're doing. Like, Gordon said it this morning on his stream. We're the bad guys. I mean, we have been, and we've been acting like it, and they've been acting like this. It's completely one-sided and unprovoked, and everything started in February of 2022, which is silly and ridiculous. I mean, this has been an ongoing situation for quite a while, and everybody's been expecting this. You look at Mearsheimer, you look at all the scientists that have been talking about this for quite a while. And unfortunately, it's coming to fruition. Look at what's happening with the BRICS alliance. Look at what's happening. Mexico is now trying to. I heard today. I think Gordon reported this morning that even Joe Biden and the Biden administration is begging Mexico now to not join the BRICS alliance, because it's, first of all, going to be embarrassing to the United States if everybody else is part of this worldwide alliance. It represents so many more people than NATO does. And that to me is why I'm most concerned about, the survival of NATO. Why is NATO still in existence at this point? It's a defensive, quote unquote, alliance against the Warsaw Pact, which hasn't existed since 1989. That's probably the first question that I'd like to see asked more often, and it's not. Then there's the expansion eastward, et cetera. Right. So
it's a great point you made there as well, how the media acted with regards to this, because the event came under attack from, I think Private Eye had a side swipe at it, as if it's some, you can just see how the mainstream media acted to sort of gang up on anybody who is talking about people coming together and talking about peace. So, you see it recently with Guardian writers such as George Monbiot. Is he talking about the Nord Stream pipeline? Of course not. He's writing articles critical of Russell Brand, saying that Russell Brand's the most dangerous. And you see how the way that acts just against individual people in this country or any Western country that are critical of NATO. Imagine if it's on a countrywide basis. Imagine the propaganda that people must be subjected to. It's almost unfathomable. And it's important to remember as well, when I said we are the bad guys, we've got to realize it. It's not like these people doing this are evil. They're just going along with whatever the system has sort of carried them along with almost. We do need to understand that just because somebody you might think is doing awful things right now and that make no sense, you've got to understand that they're victims of this system too, just as every one of us is. That doesn't mean that everybody is blameless, but it does mean that we should try and come together more and act as if we are all victims here of this power, because this is the way power acts. And it's almost like we have to go along with it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think it leads us into our next question as well, where, we see a lot of that censorship, especially when it comes to anti-war here in the U.S., but we're not as closely following that in the UK. And I'm wondering if you could enlighten people on the censorship and narrative management there that is ongoing.
Well, it's curious that the narrative management you mentioned there and the censorship, because there's something that is a big story at the moment in this country with regards to both of those things. And that's with regards to the Gary Lineker saga you've probably heard of. It even
Yeah.
made its way into, like, Reuters in India, I think, were even talking about it. It was quite strange, but basically he Gary Lineker, who, if you, for your audience, don't know, he's a presenter of a major football show on a Saturday night, the flagship show on the BBC. He's an ex footballer, once shat himself on in the World Cup. But he presents this program, gets a huge amount of money for it, like over $1 million a year, I think, and this is publicly funded money. And this is a man who, and he's not on his own here, has been highly critical of Muslim countries. We had the World Cup in Qatar recently, and the whole monologue that he presented was an anti-Muslim sort of sentiment, an anti-Qatari sentiment, because of what they said was an archaic stance on gays in that country, and that's what they concentrated on the whole tournament, instead of how well it was constructed, instead of bringing people together on the other culture. I saw Liverpool fans were at some sheikh's house and they had lions in their garden. It was just wonderful to see, instead of just louts getting drunk like is at every other World Cup. They didn't concentrate on that at all. You had to go to TikTok for that news. Instead, he did this monologue, which was so patronizing towards a country. Let's face it, Hillary Clinton was anti-gay marriage up until 2012. It wasn't 5 minutes ago. It wasn't 5 minutes ago that the United Kingdom were prosecuting somebody in this country for being homosexual and giving him a choice that he either had to take chemical castration or he had to go to jail. And he took chemical castration and ended up committing suicide soon after as a result of that. And the person we did that to shortened World War II by many years and saved millions of lives. And I'm talking, of course, about Alan Turing. And this is, we need to understand here that it wasn't 5 minutes ago that we were doing those things. And as nations, certainly the British Empire did it for hundreds of years, and America have done it for the last 100. We kept other nations down. We kept them under our heel rather than letting them grow. Who knows where these nations would be if they didn't have power, manipulating them over the last hundreds of years and stealing all their resources, etc. So we do need to have some semblance of history here. And as just to give you the background of, he does that, and that is obviously this political stance, and it's no problem. It's anti-Muslim. Nobody was having a go at Gary Lineker because he did this. Everybody was cheering him on and saying, "Oh yes, how progressive." But then he says something in a tweet last week about Suella Braverman's policy. She's the foreign secretary in this country, and we've got a so-called migrant crisis in this country at the moment, with migrants coming over on asylum seekers coming over on boats, they're saying. And Gary Lineker was pointing out, we don't take as many asylum seekers and migrants in as other European countries do. We don't. It's a paltry amount that we're taking compared to other countries. And the language that the government is using is very 1930s-esque, 1930s Germany-esque. And it was a very good point he was making. He wasn't necessarily, comparing the current Tory government to the not so nice people of the 1930s, but he was comparing the rhetoric. And it was a good point. And they hauled him in over it. They suspended him over it. And it's like, it's curious, isn't it, how you can say something that's very anti-Muslim, really, and with regards to the Qatar World Cup. But then if you say something that's pro the Muslims coming into the country, they'll silence you. And that's what it all is about. This is censorship. This is the government defining the parameters of what is acceptable to say in the mainstream. And that's what it all comes down to. And the way that it's happening over here is that, you know, the extremes are being squashed in to the point now. And, you know, they call it the Overton window, don't they? Of what is acceptable speech. I think it's Chomsky that coined the phrase in their book of manufacturing consent. But anyway, the Overton window is shifted now so far to the right in this country that we have a choice in this country, our left and right. We have a choice in this country now of between a party that is pro-war, pro-censorship, anti-worker, anti-union, pro-NATO, and loves everything Netanyahu, or we have the Tory party. And that's the choice now that we've got. That's the censorship in this country. And that's the point. That's our Overton window now. They're saying the left is that, and the right is just a little bit worse with the Tories. It's crackers. And you've got the same over there in America. I switch on 100%. I switch on Fox News sometimes, and I hear Tucker Carlson calling Joe Biden the radical left. And I think the only way Joe Biden is the radical left is that he's center right and possibly more right wing than Margaret Thatcher was. So, you know, you've got it on steroids over there, but you see the censorship in this country is the way they come down on anybody who is speaking anything out of line to a large amount of people is staggering. I remember George Galloway a few years ago. He was on Talk TV, and he said one phrase: "No Israel flags on the cup," because I think Tottenham had lost the flag, and there was a lot of Israeli flags in the crowd. He noticed, and he said that, and that was it. He was fired, and he had to go to Russian TV as a result of that to get his message out there. And then obviously you've got the censorship with regards to Russia. I can't even log on to RT now.
Same here. Telegram, it's blocked in the United States. You know, they don't want that message getting out. We've been talking about this for over a year, and we've been dealing with this. And guess what? When you try to block out one side, it's because there's some kind of truth in there. Usually, that's free Julian Assange. When you've got the most right.
What was it Assange said? What does censorship reveal? It reveals fear.
Yeah.
Right.
It's all very Orwellian, you know, it seems. And I know that's normally used as hyperbole, but it literally seems like if you are not using Newspeak, you know, they are going to come for you and get your mind right. And, you know.
And BBC is literally government-sponsored TV. Why is it that RT gets those labels, but BBC does not?
There you go. Yeah, it's very clever, mate. It's very clever the way they do it. So what they do is they say that the BBC isn't state-funded. It's not state-funded because we, the public, pay a TV license, very much in the same way that you in America pay a subscription to cable. Therefore, you know, that's not government TV. They say it's the same for BBC. However, it's mandated that you pay that TV license. Can you imagine? I'm trying to imagine. That's the same as Rupert Murdoch mandating that every single person in America has to pay a Sky subscription. Yeah. Right. So that's the way they get around tax. It.
You know,
but it's the government that gives BBC the mandate, but they say it's not funded by the government, it's funded by the people. However, the people are mandated to pay the TV's license, and if they don't, they get threatened jail, just as I was a decade ago. They nearly threw me in prison because I wouldn't pay it.
See, who signs the checks again? Who signs those checks to the BBC, I wonder?
Well, I mean, it's I know that Bill Gates has funded the BBC.
Ooh,
you did a whole lot on that.
Really? And yeah, we did. That was
not just the BBC, but he's been funding quite a few things, and that was a stream I recently was watching of yours, and it was really educational. And it's some of the things that we've been knowing about Bill Gates for a long time, but I loved how you put it in the context, and I'm going to bring it right back to when you were talking before about how we need to talk to other people who disagree with us.
So speaking of context,
in that stream,
you have
we have
in
to,
the
we
stream,
have to understand that we're all victims, and we have to understand that even the person who thinks they're the most educated person, even me, I'm ready to admit I am going to believe some things that over the last 5 years especially are untrue, because I haven't been privileged to all of the information, and I've only been maybe shown a shaft of information about a certain subject, and I haven't been given the full picture. And every single one of us is victims of that. The only reason that maybe I'll be susceptible to less of it is just because, like you guys, we spend so much of our lives dissecting what is not true and what is true, and what is government propaganda and what is not, and what is just cable companies just trying to make money off the back of a story. It's so complex, and unless you've been doing it for a long time, you do anything for a long period, you get good at it. Repetition is the mother of excellence, as they say.
yeah.
But there is so much bullshit out there, and I just look at the big stories over the last 5 years alone, with the Skripals, with Russiagate, with Syria, with it just goes, and with Ukraine, it just goes on and on and
COVID.
on. And it's like you can't keep up with the bullshit. Almost you can't keep up with. Oh, wait a minute! It's like, just look at Russiagate. Thousands of articles have been written about that are totally and utterly not based in fact.
They're not based itself. I mean, we could go in depth or shallow on this. Like, it's it's awful in my opinion. But you had on the stream that Indy was mentioning, you had a tweet from this Twitter user @Fesshole. My dad, who is very clever and loving man, has fallen down the rabbit hole of GB News, etc. over the pandemic. He recently mentioned how Bill Gates wanted to control the population with vaccines, and I have no idea how to talk to him about this. It's heartbreaking. You decided to respond. Could you enlighten the people on how you responded to this?
It was quite sad for me to see that. It's quite sad that, just because, first of all, it's the wording, isn't it? Fell down the rabbit hole of GB News. So, well, listen, first of all, if they've gone to GB News for their news, that means they're disillusioned with the news in the first place. There's a reason GB News sprung up. It's because there was a large amount of people that knew the rest of the news in the UK was bollocks, and they needed somewhere else to go. And that's why GB News sprang up. I covered a recent event at Free the Truth. Jonathan Cook made a good speech, and he echoed Julian Assange's words, where he says, why do you get The Guardian in this country? Well, the reason you get The Guardian is because there is a market in this country for the liberal elite, for news for the liberal elite, the educated liberal. That's why you get a Guardian-like newspaper spring up. If you got enough people who believed that the moon was made of cheese, you would get news from the moon. Do you see what I mean?
Yep, I do.
And Jonathan Cook.
Yeah, I think they're called One America News Network. No, I'm kidding, of course,
But that's why GB News sprung up. So first of all, you've got to understand that. And second of all, just because GB News is saying something, that doesn't mean that it's untrue. Everything that they say is not untrue. If they said everything that was untrue, they wouldn't be allowed on the air. There is some sort of regulation in this country with regards to how much bullshit you can put out there. But then they took RT off the air, and they couldn't point to any real things that RT were lying about, but they just took them off the air anyway. So that kind of negates what I was saying. You see my point?
Yeah, it parallels here. We get a little more, people outside the norm here. Specifically, I think about Alex Jones, who, personally, I feel like he is deliberately that way, right? So that he gets to take reporting from like Whitney Webb or whatever and turns it into the Illuminati, the New World Order. Like, and people get real upset about it and they cancel him and take him off the air. Meanwhile, the Epstein list still hasn't been put out. Things he's talked about still hasn't been addressed or whatever that he actually got right. I mean, classically, it was turning the frogs gay. Like, that's literally, Monsanto was increasing the amount at which frogs became hermaphroditic, something they did already, but it was increasing them. They fired the scientist. He was locked away and never seen again. And Alex Jones turned it
Good
into the
story.
frogs are they're turning the frogs gay. Like, that's what it turns into.
Look at again the most famous case of all. The example that's being made to all of us that if you stand up, this could happen to you. And as a publisher, it frightens the hell out of me, and it always has. And it's why I fight the way that I do and as hard as I do to educate as many people. And this is a guy that I'm honored to even be on a call with or on a Zoom with, because I know you've been doing this for 10 years. I feel like I just kind of picked up the mantle a couple of years ago. I thank you to Richard Medhurst for helping to open my eyes. I mean, I kind of seen Julian a little bit on Real Time with Bill Maher here or there. I hadn't really heard or paid attention until the Old Bailey trial, and I followed that day by day by day, and I realized, just first of all, the trumped up charges that they're bringing out, and the physical torture they've been putting this man under just for the couple of years that he's been in Belmarsh, let alone the time that they made him hide in exile in the Ecuadorian embassy and not be allowed to leave. The scrutiny and what we found out about all the different people that they've co-opted around him ever since. I mean, and you've seen it all from the beginning. So from your perspective, holy crap, where are we? Does it feel like, I know we have to have some hope, but like, does it feel like there's ever like look, Albo's going to come. They came to the U.S. Did he say something to Biden? We don't know.
Here's the honest answer to that is I don't know. First of all, I think it's about 6 years I've been vocal about this, but it's about 6 years, not a decade. I haven't been there really since the beginning. Although there are people that I have, and I take my hat off to them. Some of them I now call friends. He wrote to me from prison when he was first thrown in Belmarsh. I had covered the story for a while, probably about a year, since he was silenced in the embassy. And I wrote to him and he wrote back. And he begged me to save his life. And this is somebody that every fiber of my being and everything that I had seen for the previous year, 18 months, and I tried desperately to find, the things to back up the narrative that was being told about him. But everything that I found him to have said was true. And every fiber of my being knew that the British state had just thrown this man in the worst prison in this country for the crime of telling the truth. What was I supposed to do? Yeah, for an Australian man. I mean, this is power, literally saying, you can't tell the truth about us, no matter where you are in the world, because we'll reach in and grab you. And that's what this is all about. If you look at the last 5 years, you don't want these people having the final say on what the truth is, because everything in history will be bullshit.
They've lied about everything.
They've planned to kill him. That is straight up a thing that's happened.
Well, okay. Based on a lot of sources that we don't know who they are. And there's been a lot of reporting like that I've noticed in the last few years. For instance, there was a report in the New York Times recently from an anonymous source that said 6 yahoos that were pro-Ukrainian rented a yacht and blew up the pipeline. It's like, really, you printed that? But this was a
260
hell of a
feet,
lot of
heavily
serving.
reinforced pipeline. Um,
Yeah, but the story in the Yahoo News, it was heavily, it was 30, I think, or 40 officials and serving officials that they talked about had this plan, that were drawing up plans at the highest levels of the CIA and government to kidnap and kill Julian Assange in the centre of London. This is the country that says, honestly, he won't be tortured if he comes here. Honest. You were 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes ago, you were threatening to kidnap and kill him in the centre of London, and now you're pinky swearing to the High Court in the UK, and on your pinky swear, they're overturning the extradition. What the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
That's something
Pork
seriously messed up.
Assurances. I mean, I've never heard of such. I mean, there's like 2 historical cases like ever where that's actually happened.
Yeah,
where the proof's been made that this is absolutely going to, that they're going to torture him, that he's going to be in solitary for, yeah, it's and it's a warning to everybody that's trying to report on truth, to report against war, to report against what they're doing right now in Ukraine and what the Ukrainians have done to their citizens. Conscription is happening right now. Nobody's really talking about it because they're trying to bury that kind of narrative. The weapons that are going, they're saying, the experts are saying it's not necessarily going to make it there in time. I know you love to quote Dave DeCamp at Anti-War, and they're saying it's months before these things are going to be field ready. And these guys are sitting out there, I believe, that are cannon fodder right now. I don't even know how they're defending it.
Where there's no way we can mount a counteroffensive with the resources we have, But I mean, Julian Assange is they're so afraid of what he might say or get people to understand that literally they will not allow his image to be taken. We're still not able to hear from this man, let alone even see him. Still. So I mean, the head on the spikes around London Tower are still there, just metaphorically.
We're on board to help you try to fulfill that wish and that request of Julian's, which is to save his life.
Files and cakes, a posse with dynamite, something. I'm just saying.
It's curious that Julian's voice has been silenced during the period when I think in history it's fair to say there has never been this misinformation and disinformation spread by Western governments ever to this degree. And it's curious that the one man that could be telling us the truth about all of it right now is locked up in Belmarsh and silenced, and it has been for even a year before he was dragged out of his asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy. It's curious, isn't it? I mean, I've said in the past, I think I'm on record as saying Julian isn't necessarily locked up and silenced for anything that he's said in the past. He's there primarily because of everything that he could be saying right now.
Yeah, they wanted to prevent another. They wanted to prevent another Vault 7 from happening. They wanted to prevent another, another collateral damage.
Yeah, it's curious you said Vault 7 there. And if you listen to the reports from Vault 7, this was when the Pompeo and they went nuts. The high levels in America, they went nuts. Pompeo did. I think who was his name now? The FBI guy who was
Comey.
Comey
or Ray?
I think he was absolutely apoplectic at the time. I think he was the FBI guy when Vault 7 came out, and that was. I mean, I'm all about bringing people together, as you explained earlier, and I'm about saying, listen, just because somebody supports Trump, that doesn't mean that they're your enemy. They've just been misinformed too. To anybody who is a Trump supporter, listen, he's not your savior. And let me just ask you a question. And if you can answer this, please send it to my email. But he and Pompeo went after Julian harder and worse than any president before him has or since. All right. Biden's kept up with that and appealed the decision, but it was Trump that went after Julian's. Why, if he's on your side and he's all about truth and he's going to bring the deep state down, didn't he pardon Assange? Why did he go after him so vehemently? Answer me that question. You can't. And therein lies the truth.
Don't be rude.
Perfect. And don't be rude. Don't be rude to them. And I'm not rude to you. I'm not being rude to you. If you do support Trump and you believe he's fighting the deep state, he's not. This is a con man. And there are no good guys in this fight.
We used to have a name for people like that here in the South. They were called carpetbaggers. You know, like we used to. Everyone knew that guy was fake, in my opinion, especially with that
in New York. In New York as well, where he comes from, they all knew he was fake. All of them do. But he conned his way into the White House because that's how bad things are as well. It's not like he was great. It's that Hillary Clinton was so bad. And
so repellent.
To everybody, to anybody right now, to any liberals watching this who are like pro-Democrat, come on. How can you say, oh, he's terrible. He denies the 2020 election when for 4 years since 2016, your side was doing exactly the same thing by saying he was installed by Russia. This is a fact.
They still think that Russia influenced the 2016. It's unbelievable. Yeah. And our friend Turncoat Don made a video called Dueling Denials, which is really funny. It literally shows the candidates and their surrogates and the campaigns and everybody afterwards and the members of each party and the pundits and everybody just side by side saying literally the same thing. And it's part of their game. And we are anti-duopoly here. We understand that it is a game that's being played and it is propagandizing 97% of the world because they're watching one of these networks, multiple of these networks, Netflix, Amazon Prime. They're plugged into so many different things that are, and not only that, but the propaganda that happens on even episodic TV, on sitcoms that are happening everywhere. Okay, on these drama shows, on the cop and the police procedural shows, where it's always framed from the cop's perspective, and you're seeing from the inside of the police station, but you're never actually seeing why. You know, it's always like it's a very pro-cop, pro-system, pro-capitalism standpoint. It always is presented from the corporatist, capitalist, cop perspective, always being correct. And we just know, look, hey, just Google 40% of all cops, and that's all I'm going to say on that. But
we've got that problem over here. It's done like that on purpose, because if you don't know what the truth is, then any opinion that you're forming or any decision that you make is not based in fact. Do you know what I mean? I recently saw, the Twitter files, you guys have been keeping up with those, haven't you?
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
So Yoel Roth, who was the chief censor guy over at Twitter pre-Musk, he testified to Congress, and he started off his speech with, well, because Russia hacked the election in 2016. It's like, anything you say from that point is wrong, because every decision that you've made from that point and every opinion that you form from that point is not based in fact. CrowdStrike have admitted under testimony that they have no evidence that anybody from Russia hacked into the servers at the DNC, let alone that they could prove that it was state Russia that did it. They've testified to that fact. They never gave the servers to the FBI. The FBI just took what the Democratic sort of machine spun out from that as fact. You're not basing what you're doing from fact there.
But Gordon, they had great memes. They had the best memes. You know,
Benny actually said, if you look at the forensic, if you go and you look at any forensic stuff that there was, it did not indicate at all that there was any kind of hacking from Russia.
Job.
However, there was quite a bit. Right. The call was definitely within the house. And I'm not going to. I don't like this ES&S, the Dominion thing, the lawsuit that they had against Fox, and all the liberals are going crazy about that. But ES&S was just as guilty of this stuff. And then they had the shadow app. But I think that I want to go back to hand-counted paper ballots. Like, I don't know why we need to have all of these machines that are incredibly vulnerable, that are proprietary in nature, that you can't get into and audit the code from third-party auditors to see exactly, are they vote flipping? Because we've definitely heard of vote flipping happening in Texas across the board ballot selections, all kinds of weird anomalies. On top of them closing ballot places, ballot locations in poor areas to make the lines longer. 3 machines don't work, so you got a super long line, and people can't afford to stay in line. So therefore, who ends up being able to vote in the first place? It's what our friend Fiorella always talks about. She says, we don't have free and fair elections in this country. So we have selected representatives.
Not gotten to select his leader for the last 3 leaders now. In your country,
two. They picked Boris, didn't they?
Rishi, yeah. If you want to call that choosing,
yeah. I mean, the state picked Boris by putting as much propaganda out about Jeremy Corbyn as possible. That's basically what happened there. Just to go back to your point there about Fox and the Dominion. What I find key about that story is the Liberals have obviously gone off and said, "Oh, we had Fox is like, how can you trust Fox? It's obviously they're talking rubbish. It's untrue." It's like, listen, Fox are only giving their audience what they know their audience wants, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier with the Jonathan Cook video. The whole thing is on my YouTube if you want to watch it, where he talks about the reason these news agencies are there is because that's what the audience wants. And in private, they themselves, didn't they? The Fox News presenters had a private and a public position, it seems. Yep. Correct. So they themselves are doing the very same thing that they charged Hillary Clinton with doing, before the 2016 election in the October surprise. So there's that. And you've got to almost go, well, why are they doing that? It's because they know their audience won't accept that there's nothing nefarious about the 2020. They know that something just isn't right here. So they end up believing almost in the first conspiracy theory because they're desperately trying to hold on to something that makes sense. So the Fox News presenters are they're victims themselves because they know if they come out and go, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this Dominion, we can't find anything wrong with it actually, and tell the truth, their audience figures are going to drop and they're going to get fired. They've got bills to pay like anybody else. They've got mortgages. Yeah, it's fine. Their properties are still are very nice and very plush, and they live a life of luxury. But that's even more for them to hold on to and protect, isn't it? So they're victims of this too, and that's pretty much what. And over in America, I know people ask, why does Tucker Carlson get to tell the truth about war in this way? Is it because his audience don't like war? Is that as simple as that? The reason he's coming out and talking about the truth about Syria and other things, is it because his audience know what's up with that? It's really quite curious, isn't it? But yeah, I do feel as if the presenters themselves are almost victims in all this as well.
Absolutely.
I think he's also lost a lot of his advertisers, which frees him a lot more to speak freely about what's going on. And look, it's the advertisers. It's sponsored. The corporate news is sponsored by Pfizer. It's sponsored by Raytheon. It's sponsored by Lockheed Martin.
That makes more sense than mine.
Right. It's sponsored by the automotive companies. And because Tucker only has like the My Pillow guy and some gold guys and people who are in agreement with the message that he's sharing, for the most part, the anti-Biden message, which we are also kind of it's kind of funny. Look, we spent years demonizing and screaming about how Fox News is fake. But guess what? They started listening to their audience more. They started listening to what was out there, and they have been, unfortunately, and it's sad to say this, but they have certainly been more open to the actual left, to the anti-imperialist left, than any other corporate network has been in the last 2 years.
We're still
And
the same people that yelled about Bush taking us
It's
to
terrible
war.
to say that.
We yelled about
They're all the
Obama
same,
taking
but
us to war. Like the Republicans have heard us complain about this. I think for a while, to the point where they heard us to some degree. I think, but I also think
there's literally been a blackout on corporate media to anybody who is the left of the squad. And we know that where they've gone. I mean, it's effectively we are persona non grata on TV when it comes to that. And that perspective, the independent perspective, calling the duopoly, calling out the corporate nonsense, calling out how bought and paid their entire message is, it starts to unravel their entire thing. So they have to keep that shut out as much as possible, which is why we're seeing the ramp up in censorship. We're seeing the pushing out to alternative networks and to alternative platforms because they're not allowing the COVID narrative. Now, how long before they're going to start to censor Ukraine narrative when it comes to YouTube? We've definitely seen people get, I know RBN, Nick had a video pulled down famously about Ukraine from YouTube. And so we've been moving to, like you have, to Rockfin, to Rumble, to Locals, to directly communicating with our, with the people around us and with our supporters, because they don't want that kind of speech or that kind of narrative coming through the mainstream. People find it. They are finding it.
It's why people like Seymour Hersh have to use Substack. It's why people like Gordon Dimmack have to use Substack.
Hey, how about that?
Yeah, so, I've got a Substack.
I love the first story. Imagine if Jerry Corbyn tried a deadly insurrection on Parliament. Yeah, that's gonna get you.
I remember at the time thinking, what would happen if January the 6th happened here? What would happen? Because I remember it was they said on the news in America it was a big insurrection. It's like, okay, all right. So let's imagine this really is an insurrection. What would happen if Jeremy Corbyn did a speech outside St. Paul's Cathedral to the masses, and he said, we're going to go over to the UK Parliament now, and we're going to peacefully protest. And you got a bunch of people who were, telling people we've got to go into the Parliament. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering how close they would have got to Parliament before they were all shot. Because that's what would happen if they tried that in the UK. And if they tried it, and if you actually look at coup events around the world, of which United States has been behind many
frequently, yeah.
They are usually quite violent and end in hundreds of dead people. Yep. And Ashley Babbitt, God rest her soul, I'm not, to anybody, any conservatives, I'm not at all pouring score on her life, but this wasn't necessarily what people were led to believe in the liberal media over the last few years, was it? I mean, I can't imagine that if a Jeremy Corbyn's supporter got into the Houses of Parliament in a buffalo hat and no shirt, that 9 police officers at one stage would be standing around him, and all one of them would do was open the door as if
get
for
him
him to walk through. Exactly.
I don't know.
And,
I mean, this is for you guys. Every 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. You're doing bonfires and whatnot to celebrate a guy who's every person on the internet now wants to steal. But
I personally, we celebrate on November the 5th his failure.
Yeah.
I personally should think we should forget about our failures.
Yep. Yep. I support National Guillotine Day myself. I feel like the French taught us how to stay liberated.
Yeah, but the problem with that, Reef, is I've had this talk with the missus a lot, because she does. We have these talks, and a lot of the time these talks end with the missus going, "Just chop their heads off." Yeah. And I'm not saying that she's wrong, but what I am saying is this: if if you look at history and you look at the French Revolution,
Yeah.
the people who chopped the heads off people ended up getting their heads chopped off too.
Yep.
So you've got to be careful with that. And the baying crowd is violent. And whenever there's a vacuum of power, there's a vacuum of power and something's got to be filled.
Rome knew the power of the mob pretty well, if I remember correctly, especially when their empire was dying.
There's similarities there as well. There's similarities at the end of the Roman Empire.
They at least had better roads,
Yeah, they did lean into debauchery, and they did lean into the lines being blurred between the male and the female species. I know that is a hot topic at the moment that we won't necessarily delve into.
Parties were a good time. All right, when you had lots of cheap wine
conversation.
But yeah, no, it's but glad you're on Substack. Glad you're still able to speak some truth to power. If you ever end up in Belmarsh, let us know. Send us a letter. We'll gladly accept.
Yeah, I'll try and get the word out somehow. I don't think
mail them back.
I really don't think they think it will come to that. You say where are we? You asked me earlier where are we now with it. I don't know. I hope that we're going to see some movement in the coming months, but you just don't know. I've been hoping this for 6 years, and it does feel like that we're getting some movement now. His name is certainly trending on Twitter more often.
Yeah.
There's more truth out there. The people who have been spreading lies over the last 10 years have stopped. I don't know whether you've noticed that at all. There's not as many lies now being told about him, just because people know the truth now, and they're kind of getting pissed off with the fact that, hold on a minute, how can we point fingers at China's secrecy laws or Russia and the manipulation of their media, when the journalist that has been the most accurate in our history, probably actually, when you think about it, when you think about the revelations from WikiLeaks, they've done more journalistic work with global gravitas in the last 15 years on their own than the entire Western media have combined since World War II. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm being serious. If you look at the leaks that have the massive stories that WikiLeaks have broken, not just about America, but other countries around the world too, it's brought down governments, their work has. And this is the fight of our lives. It's the fight for truth. And hopefully we're going to get some semblance of that in the future. Albanese said nice things before he became leader, or he's over there at the moment with Biden and Rishi Sunak, the democratically elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, just in case anybody from the Met is listening to me. I'd not say anything about that. And hopefully we're going to get something in the coming months, but we just don't know. And I've had enough false dawns and seen enough false dawns over the last 6 years to know that however close we think we are, you don't stop, you don't take the foot off the pedal, you keep going, you keep getting the word out, you keep going to the protests, and the people who do protest down there in London on every weekend are heroic, and they're wonderful.
Amazing.
And some of them are my friends for life. They really are. They're the best people, and they're the people who know what's important and know how big a fight this is, because this really is democracy that's on the line.
And I would like to know.
Yeah, it's our ability to know what the truth is.
Before Julian Assange is free, I feel like we've been waiting a while,
Now, who's the current Home Secretary? I remember it was Priti Patel, and then she was replaced by somebody, and then they were replaced by somebody. So are they still just another government corporate flunky that's going to get in line and do basically what they're told? Is there anybody that possibly is in this government that could stand up and speak up on, and have effect?
Well,
That's one of our hopes. That, and then of course we're always pushing on Merrick Garland to we're advising people always call to the Attorney General's office and say drop the charges. And we need to have that public pressure. Misty has been phenomenal here at putting the pressure and keeping pressure campaigns going on here. But the current Home Secretary and what the possibility is there.
okay, I understand where the confusion is. You could say that about any position in government, because you know how they had parties through COVID. It came out, and that's a big story recently in the UK as well. They're having the parties all the way during COVID. I actually think they were just having a giant game of musical chairs, and whoever landed last got the position of Home Secretary. It's Suella Braverman at the moment that's Home Secretary, and that's the person who Gary Lineker aimed his tweet at with regards to listen, our salvation is not going to be. We have. I don't think Julian's salvation is going to be in any court. I think if the powers that be get their way, they will lock him up and throw away the key. And it's very convenient for them to have him silenced, and for all his supporters to be silenced too. It would be convenient. But I don't think it's going to come to that. I don't think he's going to win in a court, any court but the court of public opinion. I think that's what is important. So if you are in the UK, write to your MP, tell them how important this is. Link to my videos, any of them about Assange over the last few years, and just say we're psychologically torturing a journalist here for telling the truth about America, and you're saying that you're going to extradite him to the country that not only has a quarter of the world's prison population, but with only 5% of it, over 5% of the population in the globe, but also has extreme measures in their prisons, the most restrictive special administration measures. He will surely be put up with it, even if you do pinky swear that you won't. Amnesty International have said that any assurances are inherently unreliable. Amnesty International have said that any assurances that the United States give are inherently unreliable. So you're going to send him over there where they're going to torture him, this country that were conspiring to kidnap and kill him not long ago, and the indictment of which is based upon the lies of a convicted pedophile and
pedophile.
You know, this is horrific. So write to your politician. Tell them you will not accept this. Tell them as a British citizen, you won't accept it, and tell your politician that they have a duty to make sure this does not happen, and forces the government to do the right thing. And if you're in the US, similarly, write to your politician and demand that they do what you want, because they're meant to do that. They're your representatives. Demand that they do, and demand that Biden drop these charges. If you want to blame things on Trump, fine. You go ahead. You drop these charges first. Remember, it was your administration that did the appeal. This has now gone through 3 administrations, through Trump, through Obama, and now Biden as well. This has to be brought to a head. You cannot silence this man forever and torture him and then point fingers at other countries around the world and say your shit stinks. Look at how you're torturing this journalist.
Physically as well as psychologically, by the way. He's already had stroke.
He's already had a stroke. If you listen to John Pilger, who has met him in prison, he says when they hug, he can feel his ribs. You know, this is a man who didn't see daylight for years in the Ecuadorian embassy before this. He's been incarcerated under arbitrary detention or in Belmarsh now for over a decade. I cannot imagine what this is like, and for why. For why? I had some Australian guy on Twitter the other day trying to convince me that no, a duty has been taken here. Courts that, we have seen justice in the courts, and Julian has seen due process through the courts because he didn't hack a password. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Wait, what?
Your whole argument is because he didn't hack a password, something that is in an indictment, remember, full of lies, right? That an indictment that says that old Siggy was a hacker, this convicted pedophile and fraudster who conned the FBI into an immunity deal that Iceland had to resurrect a law that hadn't been used in decades to stop what they called a crime spree that this guy was doing across Europe, this convicted pedophile and fraudster, because he had immunity from the FBI for a false testimony.
Mm-hmm.
That is in the indictment. But this guy was taking something else from within the indictment and saying, no, he tried to hack a password. And he said, to my knowledge, he's never denied it. He denied it in his first appearance in this country. He said, I didn't hack no password. He said those exact words.
Yeah.
And this is a journalist in Australia with the ear of Albanese, apparently. It's like you were getting basic facts wrong. And it's curious, isn't it, that you keep getting basic facts wrong that always benefit the CIA.
Amazing how that works,
Strange,
right?
isn't it?
Yep.
But because Julian didn't hack a password or didn't, for those who listening to listening to this, they don't understand. Julian in this indictment, which with 18 charges, you know, this isn't just one. This is facing hundreds of years, 175 years in prison for this. And when he gets a court appearance in the United States, it will be in Virginia in the espionage court, where the jury is made up of CIA family members, and there's no, he can't even make a public public defense in the public interest defense. He can't even say, yes, I did it, and here's why. Can't even say that. So there's no, sense here of any fair treatments with regards to the law. It's I forgot my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
So it's been a long day.
To wrap up too. Please, I know you have a TikTok. I know you've got Twitter. I know you've got all that stuff. Please tell the people where they can find you.
I'm telling people to find me on Substack now. And listen, the reason I'm telling people to find me on Substack is, listen, on Substack, I've got your email. And who knows where this censorship's going to lead? We've seen it happen to YouTube. We've seen it happen to Twitter. We've seen it happen to every social media platform. They can't shut TikTok down because it's Chinese, so they're talking about banning it. Who knows whether that's going to happen next with Substack? Who knows whether it's going to happen next with any platform that I'm on, Rumble included? They could shut that down. It's very easy for them to say, right, we won't even let a company host your platform. Do you see what I mean? Like they did with WikiLeaks to begin with. So go to Substack, because there I'll get your email and I'll be able to send my stuff directly to you for as long as email is around, because I really do think that this censorship is not going to stop. They are not going to ease up on this. They are desperate to hide the truth. And that's why they've locked Julian up, because WikiLeaks has a 100% record of telling it. Julian isn't in prison for anything he did wrong. He's in Belmarsh.
These people are always trying this.
He's in Belmarsh.
They're always trying. Now. Sorry. Go ahead.
He's in Belmarsh right now for everything he did right.
Yep.
Yeah. They're always trying to silence people that are exposing their specific corruption. So why are they actually trying to silence? Look at what happened just last week with Twitter files. I know we're going to wrap up, but the way that Congress and all the entire corporate media ganged up on what Elon Musk was doing, calling it stenography, calling it PR, no, he actually uncovered communications between government and a private corporation where they were specifically telling them to censor or ban or look closely at certain accounts.
What do they call
that? Should not be happening.
When state
it's called fascism. Yes,
that's it. I remember.
It's called fascism.
Anyway, Gordon, thank you for coming. Appreciate
Thanks
you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Guys. Happy to have you back.
What a pleasure.
People can find you. We'll put your links in the description. But at Gordon Dimmack right underneath you, people can find you quick there. And Gordon Dimmack on Substack. But yeah. As always, kids, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.